welcome to Healing Visionaries online show. Today we have with us Taz Thornton. Taz has been following a shamanic and animistic path for some 20 years and insists she's just beginning. Having been called by spirit at an early age, she went through a series of traumatic life events that culminated in a broken back and a breakdown before rebuilding herself into the shape she was always meant to be. A best-selling author and award-winning coach, Taz blends medicine and shamanic teachings with the modern world, running an intensive spiritual empowerment program now in its 8th year, as well as a deeper 3-year program. Her programs work around medicine wheel teachings, whilst also incorporating firewalking, deep coaching, and circle work, leading to profound personal transformation. Thank you, Taz, for being with us today and your time coming on the show.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for that wonderful introduction.
Definitely. Well, I'm really interested to hear more about your work and your programs. I was looking at your longer term shamanic training and wondering, how do you start people on that, in that program? What do you start with?
We start with the 14-month program, and to give a little bit of background, it used to be called a 1-year shamanic training program, and it used to be based just around shamanism and be for 12 months. But what I found was that I was coming into contact with so many people in the kind of modern day who hadn't heard of shamanism, who there's a hashtag I sometimes use hashtag hippie shit. And it's because when I first started talking about the power of spirit and energy in business context, the starchy old guy in a pinstripe said, well, that's a load of old hippie shit, isn't it? And I kind of said, well, yes, it is. Thank you very much. I'm going to take that and use it as my hashtag. So, so it kind of enabled me to start looking at people who were stuck in left brain business in a different way. And I was meeting so many people through my mainstream coaching work and through business networking and through my speaking, who so desperately needed some of these medicine teachings, but were so stuck in the, well, it's just woo-woo and it doesn't exist, that I was getting a nudge from my spirits were saying, these people need us, these people need this, you know, go and say this, go and say. And in the end, I felt that although shamanism and animism are my own personal path and they are my life, I felt that calling it a shamanic training program was almost becoming too restrictive for the people that needed the work. So
what do you do?
Yeah, it gradually morphed into this spiritual empowerment program, because I'm going all over the place here, Cailin, so bear with me. Although I have quite an issue with people just tagging shamanism onto the end of everything. I mean, if you look on Google, you can even find shamanic knitting now. You know, it drives me bonkers. You know, just because you pick up a drum, it doesn't mean it's shamanic. So on the one hand, I am absolutely a purist when it comes to not mixing the teachings and not calling something shamanism if frankly it shaman isn't. But
I love that.
Yeah.
That's so good.
But I'm also a big believer in just allowing whatever teachings need to come through for whatever that person needs. So that person might need something that's core shamanism. They might need something that's kind of more of a medicine path teaching, but isn't technically shamanism. Somebody else might need to look at the language they're using to even talk about themselves, which might then touch into NLP. Somebody else might just need some talking therapy. Other people might really benefit from rounds and rounds of deep circle work, but wouldn't necessarily otherwise find shamanism. So how do we do it? And I worked with my spirits, and we moved away from calling it a shamanic training program into a spiritual empowerment program. So the way the weekends now work, I do 5 long weekends over a 14-month program. Actually, it used to be 13-month. It's 14-month because our venue guy cocked up with the dates this year, so it's become a 14-month. And the first weekend is kind of the cementing and the building of the tribe, and we all sit around. We do introductions. We do basic guidelines. What's acceptable in circle, what isn't. that when they step into that room, they're stepping into a spiritual space, a space of growth. It's not the same as gossiping in the kitchen. They hold a certain energy when they get into that space. We do ceremony. We do different ceremonies on that first night that helps them to break down their barriers and get to know each other on an energetic level. Excuse me. Sometimes we'll do a ceremony where they use drums and communicate just through drum work in pairs, and we get it one at a time, and we teach people to communicate from a heart level, from a, I was going to say spirit level, but there's a pun in that somewhere. And that's how the first weekend works, so that they learn about the difference between a power animal, a spirit animal, and a spirit teacher. They learn how to journey on that first weekend. We do meditation, and then once we're past that first weekend, on every other one of those weekends, we work on a different element of the medicine wheel. So we always, so I'm a weird mix in that from my teachers, I learned the majority of my teachings around a North American medicine wheel, although my heart and my energy and my teachings are all around these British Isles. And of course, as much as we can Google and find a Celtic medicine wheel, we know that really our own path here, our spiritual traditions were eroded so much with the coming of the Romans and the church that it's hard to find. So I stick with the North American medicine wheel because for me that feels like home, because that's what I learned with.
Now, if I can just ask you a clarification question. We had Leo Rutherford on another episode. And
Leo's fab.
Yeah, he really gave a nice introductory teaching using the medicine wheel. He had the cloth and the ribbons and the shells and the water there. Is yours similar to that?
Yeah, it would be very, very similar. For me, when people don't know what a medicine wheel is, I explain it very, very simply. It's just like looking at the face of a compass. And it is simply a tool to divide up teachings. So when we look at medicine wheels across the globe, other people might have different teachings in different quadrants. And of course, that's without touching on the minor directions. You could spend your entire lifetime just working the major directions, the cardinal directions, and still not have learned everything. But the teachings will largely be the same. So Leo and I actually do our teachings on the same site in Bedfordshire. So we frequently bump into each other. We got double booked once last year. His group and my group both turned up at the same time, and we had to kind of split the site. It worked really well. Bit of coyote medicine going on there. So yeah, same thing. I always start in the east because for me that's fire. It's where everything begins, and where I think I work differently to some other shamanic teachers I've come across is that I work in opposites. Only once. This program's been going for, we're just coming into the 8th year. We've got 2 places left for the one that starts at the end of September. And only once have I just walked away the way around the wheel. I will never do that again. And I never. And it's because when people are coming in this fresh, I absolutely believe that the majority of the Western world is addicted to drama. We have massive drama addiction going on, and I think it's largely because something's missing. We know something's missing. We don't know what it is. And when we go into drama, it gives us a high intensity energy burst, but it's a low level energy burst. So it gives us the hit, but it's a low level hit. It's like, I guess, shooting up with narcotics rather than the hit you get through laughter and pure joy. Low vibrational hit rather than a high vibrational hit. So of course we start off in east, which is all about fire. And if we look at the allied forces and the shadow forces, allied, there's joy, there's passion, there's drive, there's sexuality, sensuality, creativity. But on the shadow side of that fire knife edge, of course, you've got drama, you've got anger, you've got jealousy, you've got rage, you've got all those things that if we were watching a TV drama, they would use fire to light that scene. So the way I usually work is then, once we've done the fire weekend, the next weekend we meet is the earth weekend. We work in opposites, because then that grounds that energy and it takes us back to the place of healing, groundedness, nurturing, connection. I don't like the idea of feminine versus masculine energies, because I think that's become so distorted. And who the hell says this should be a feminine trait, this should be a masculine trait? But to use them in the context,
it's not even applicable.
But to use them in the context that people understand them, fire would be seen as a more masculine energy and earth as a more feminine energy. So when I work east and then balance that with west, it balances it all out. The 1 year that we worked straight around and we went straight from fire into south and water, which of course is all about the flow of emotions, those people who were still carrying some of that drama and getting off on the fire buzz went straight into allowing that to pervade their emotions, and it just woof. Oh my God, that year was full of so much drama. Never
What
again.
What's one story if you can tell?
Oh, what's one story I could safely tell you?
I can't imagine what drama would grew up.
So we sometimes, and it carried on throughout the year, though people were going into judgment, and there was one beautiful incident where I build in some of the extreme empowerment. So when I trained as a firewalk instructor, we also did things, you know, like the bear throat, arrow break and board breaks, that kind of thing. And I bring those in as well. That's where it all melds. So it's absolutely based around the medicine wheel and shamanism. It absolutely is based around spirit. But I also want people learning about themselves and doing practical exercises that reinforce the messages they get from spirit. So on that particular year, there was a lady, and she'd lost so much of herself. She'd been through all kinds of abuse for so many years, and she was a shell, you know. And we did a board break exercise with her, and this is, I guess, where some of the coaching work and NLP comes in. And on one side of the board, we'd got them to write everything they wanted to break through, and on the other side, the things they wanted to attract in. And this lady stood up and she broke through that board with such, you could see spirit pouring into her and through her. It was magnificent. She just shone. And the power that poured out of her when she did that was immense. But there was somebody else in the circle who was still in the drama and the emotion, and they'd had a bit of a thing going on, who then told her that everyone had been afraid of her in that moment and she'd broken through the board in the wrong way. And of course, because of her background, she believed that and she took it on board. So that took a lot of unpicking. I mean, this was way back in the early years. So things like that, there were threads of a little bit of lust starting to go across the circle that I would normally say, look, you know, we are going to form very close bonds in circle, but we don't go there. You want to do that in your own time, fine, but we don't bring that into circle. We keep it clean. And because we've got fire going straight into water and emotion, it all started to flow through and got, I mean, beautiful teachings.
Very interesting. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Such a difference. So now we go fire in the east, earth in the west, and then we go back to water and emotions and all those wonderful teachings about the difference between you know, victim states and warrior states, hunter versus hunted, and then we go across to the north. So of course the north and all that air and the clarity there perfectly balances the teachings we have about the victim warrior and some of the drama that can sit in the south teachings. So the way I would explain that to kind of a corporate setting, because I sometimes bring this stuff into corporate settings, and I use the medicine wheel almost as a personality tool with them in corporate, so they can understand I'm naturally more of a fire person, but when I'm upset, I go over there. Oh, okay, so I know that if I'm naturally more air and I look at you over there and I just don't get it because I'm more cerebral, I know that I need to address you in this way to get the best results. So that can work. So the way I explain the kind of north-south balance into that corporate setting for people who are more left brain is, you imagine that you're in an office, and you know those scenarios where everybody's crowded around the water cooler, or maybe they're in the kitchen or in the ladies' room, and they're all having a bitch about someone, and you might walk past and you get a hint of that, and oh my God, are they talking about me? Everybody hates me, it's awful, oh, everybody thinks this, and you start to go into drama. Whereas if you go over to the north and you just take that eagle's perspective and you fly high above the situation, you can see what's really going on. You can see the whole playing field, and you can see where that conversation came from, and you don't get caught in the drama, and you can get some balance, which will then allow you to decide which way to move with clarity and purpose.
Yeah, truly, that is a dilemma in those kind of environments, and the people are so unaware.
Yeah. Well, it's the way of life, isn't it? It's like we said earlier about this drama addiction. It's so the way of life. And sometimes my wife and I have to remind ourselves that actually we who do this work, we're the minority. The majority of people live.
You forget.
Yeah. They live in the kind of drunken office party and who was getting off with who and who's been saying this and
Yeah.
they got that promotion and I want it and yeah.
Right. So in what context are they asking you to come in? Like, how do you market yourself for that?
You know, I don't really market myself in the traditional sense anymore. Part of my background is in journalism and PR and marketing. So I guess some of that comes naturally to me.
Mm.
But I think where this work and having an idea of spirit and energy and groundedness and absolutely being aware of that tipping point, that balance between having confidence and being an ego. And I think a lot of people don't understand the difference between being confident and being an ego. I think a lot of people see someone who is confident and assume they're egotistical when in fact they could just be absolutely in their own power and know what their mission and purpose is. I think that holds back a lot of healers, therapists, visionaries, light workers, not my favorite term, from growth and putting themselves out there for the good of the universe as well, because they are afraid of being seen as being in ego and being judged. And we need to learn the difference here between judgment and discernment. So when I market myself as such, what that means to me is I show up regularly. I post regularly on LinkedIn and on Facebook, but I tend to coach and advise and give tips and teachings through that content. So what happens is people will read that or watch it or consume it in some way and it will touch them in some way. And they will say, can you come and work with our team? Or can you come and speak for us? Or I'm really interested in that program you run. Right. And it goes from there. I never set out to go into corporate. In fact, when I first left corporate life, I still felt so scarred from it that for the first few years, I wouldn't touch any of it. I'm just going to teach shamanism. My brand then was Firechild Shamanism, which still exists. But it's only about 3-4 years ago that I started operating under my name, under Taz Thornton, because part of that was forcing myself to stop hiding behind a brand and to be absolutely me, because that means that I have to walk my talk. I have to be in my power as much as possible, and I can't just put up a facade. And there's something about that level of truth and honesty in today's material world that I think somehow cuts through all the modern day bullshit. It cuts through the plastic. Yeah. So that's why, yeah, I use social a lot. Yeah, I put out, I mean, you get my weekly mailer and there's a monthly one. So yes, I put information out, but it's not marketing in the traditional sense, in the way that we think of marketing. For me, the marketing vehicles we have are just tools that allow us to get a message of truth, of authenticity, of healing, of possibility, of potential to thousands of people. That's the difference for me with working one-to-one. I will still do one-to-one coaching and one-to-one healing work. But for me, the real power is when I can stand on a platform in front of thousands of people, because then I can potentially positively affect many people at once. And it's not about me. It's not about ego. Naturally, I'm actually more of an introvert. I've had to work with spirit a lot for this, because if you go back to some of my backstory, you touched on in that intro, where I was,
Tell us about that.
Yeah, I was in a very broken state. I'd been in an abusive relationship. I was rattling with antidepressants. I didn't know who I was. And I thought I wanted to get out of life. I didn't understand how I could hit a pause button. I just knew I wanted to escape from this rat run in this life that didn't fit me. And that culminated in, well, the first one was a car accident when I was deliberately taking silly risks because I didn't want to be alive. And that ended up breaking my back. And then there was another incident where I got out of that relationship, met the lady who eventually came to be my wife. I was blissfully happy, but lots of people around us weren't happy. Our families weren't happy at first. And I had this moment where I thought everything was my fault, and I got interrupted where I was about to wrap my childhood karate belt around my neck and go over the banister. If I look back at that, I'm pretty sure that was a walk-in. It was like somebody had taken over me, but that's probably another story for another day. And then in 2000 and something, I had this life threw a series of curveballs at me. I mean, in the space of something like 8 weeks, my uncle died, my dad died, A lot of the financial security I thought I was getting disappeared overnight. There was my wife was diagnosed with MS and then made redundant. All these there's other stuff as well that I couldn't fairly share publicly, and it all happened within an 8-week period. And at the end of that time, when I found myself kind of rocking and crying and trying to hide under my mum's dining room table, I knew something had to give, and it couldn't keep being me. And somehow I kept working through that for 4 years before I dug my way out with a teaspoon and started doing this work full time. And it was only in retrospect I could look back and say that you had a breakdown, but it was a breakthrough, because if that hadn't happened,
Wow, right.
I wouldn't be doing that. So that's the reason that I push myself out there so much and do what, the marketing route, if you like, is because I genuinely believe that one of my missions in life is to use the stuff that I've been through to help other people. Maybe, I broke my back maybe so somebody else didn't have to. I tried to check out and got interrupted so that other people can see there's another way. I went through that breakdown so that I can help other people spot the signs and start to tap into that well of awesome power and potential that I believe we all have. And they can recognize that they can make changes in their life. They can trust in the universe. They can get more in touch with spirit. They can find their path, and their path isn't necessarily the one that's been fed to them. It's about remembering who we were going to be, who we could have been before the world told us who it wanted us to be. So
do that one more time, please. I like that.
So that we remember who we could have been before the world told us who it wanted us to be. And of course that feeds in TV, radio, media, our parents, our peers. We start to build this idea of who we think we should be. And very often that goes right to the head and breaks away from the heart. So this whole head-heart disconnect again. So again, naturally introverted. I was the shy, quiet bookworm at school, and also the weird kid.
Really? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I was the weird kid who was seeing things that the other kids weren't, and the parents used to complain to my mum because I was scaring their kids when I said I could see a spirit. I was that kid. But it's that mission that has driven me to learn to be more confident and to push that comfort zone and to put myself out there. I get on stages and grab every media opportunity, not because, hey, look at me, but because, hey, I can reach more people and I can maybe help you to step into your own power and recognize that we can only ever spend each day once.
Yeah. And well, with your background in journalism and PR, you have this great presence and speaking ability.
It seemed like that, like I've been kind of maneuvered. It's like if there's a giant chessboard, somebody has put me into the right place, and
yes,
that's okay. That's okay.
There's something I spotted on your website that I'd really love to ask you about more, and it goes back to this whole concept of the word shamanism, and be one who is a shaman versus doing shamanic practices. And then it's so overused today. Everything is getting this label.
Yeah.
And then you say, tapping into your homeland and all of the ancestors in the spirit world there, that you can, I wrote it down here. It says, for the homelands to come forth and be understood until another appropriate descriptor emerges.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Okay. So the word shaman, that you all know there's this whole discussion and this massive debate in shamanic circles about, and I remember when Ross Heaven was still alive and walking these lands, he used to say that it was like calling somebody who did electrics an electrical practitioner instead of an electrician. But the teachers I worked with most would all say, well, the work that we do in the Western world today that follows a shamanic path is very different to the way it would have been for our ancestors, and even in tribal communities today, where the shamanism was a kind of being called to that was life or death. That you couldn't just decide I'm going to be a shaman. In fact, if we go back to the old ways, people would have done everything they could to not become a shaman.
It's hard. Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, shamanism is a descriptor I need to use so that people understand it. But then the other issue that we have with shamanism, and this is not to knock plant spirit medicine at all, but that's not my path. And if you look at the global shamanic animistic map, the amount using the hallucinogenic plants is a tiny proportion, and part of certain ceremonies within that. And one of the other struggles I have over here, particularly with the way some of the media has reported shamanism, is you say shamanism and people say, oh, what do you take? You know, occasionally have a paracetamol if I've got a headache, you know. And so it's getting past that as well. There's so much misinformation about shamanism and animism and what it is and what it isn't. So I use shamanism as a descriptor because in order to attract the people, or to be seen by the people who need this work, they're going to be looking for shamanism. But we would have had a different term in these isles. Who knows whether we actually had shamans? I mean, some of the anthropologists will say, yes, you absolutely did. Others will say, no, you didn't. But we certainly here would have had an animistic culture. When I work with my own spirit guides, they say, yes, we would have used altered states. They've shown me different ways of doing it. So it feels true, but the word shaman for me doesn't feel like it's mine to claim. It feels like it's an honorary title. It's like people who haven't got a doctorate calling themselves a doctor. You know, it doesn't feel mine to take.
Establishment. I mean, really, to be a shaman, you have to be known that way in your community. Everybody's coming to you for this healing work. And
they kind of do, but if anybody calls me a shaman, I say, please don't call me a shaman. I'm not, because I use the tools, I do the work, I operate shamanically, I live shamanically as much as I can in a modern day society.
Yeah.
But it's very, very rare that I meet someone today, particularly, to be a little bit political, particularly somebody with white skin, that I would say that I would feel happy calling a shaman. And it's not to knock their work. It's just that the depth we can go to now isn't the depth we could have gone to then. Generally, it's a generalization.
Yeah.
So, you know, if I ever find a word, or if spirit gives me a word that's a better descriptor, that feels right, that fits more into my own heritage, fine, I'll use it. But until then, sorry everybody who gives the electrician argument, I'm a shamanic practitioner, I'm an animist. I use shamanic tools to help other people. I teach other people shamanic tools. I teach them journeying, I teach them spirit contact, I teach them the tools of the medicine wheel. But that doesn't make them shamans either. Exactly. It makes them people who are a bit more aware and have tools to live their life in a more balanced way.
Exactly. And that's why I'm doing this show. People, who are already doing it or deepening their practice.
Oh, do you know, some of the people I've heard and I've met who said, oh, yes, I'm a shaman. Are you? Okay. What path did you follow? Who did you learn with? You know, what tools do you use? Somebody once told me that they practiced shamanism because they had a special set of cards and some symbols. That's like Reiki plus, not bloody shamanism, you know? Right. Wow. It's not. You don't have a shamanic circle because you sit and drum. You have a drumming circle.
Yes. Thank you for pointing that out.
And it's not shamanic. If you pick up a pigeon feather and stick it in your hair, A, it's not shamanic. B, be aware of cultural misappropriation, not necessarily with a pigeon feather, but with wearing a pigeon in your hair. And, you know, if you go to a festival and buy a headdress, for God's sake, stop buying into all that bullshit. It's what you wear doesn't make you a shaman, doesn't make you a shamanic practitioner either. The tools that you carry don't make you a shaman or a shamanic practitioner. It's what's in here and the work you do with spirit. And that's for spirit to decide, not your ego.
Right. Yeah.
Rant over.
Think they're on the path and they actually never do reach.
Some people have just watched far too many episodes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Charmed.
Yeah, I don't even have TV. I know of this show, but I don't know. Now we had another
English
concept
shows, but go for it.
about connecting with the spirits and the energies of the land where you live. Of course, you focus on the British islands, and you know, where you live, and the ancient prehistory that's been eroded, you know, everywhere. Yeah. Tell us your thoughts around that.
Oh, well, if we look back at prehistory here, I mean, we know, for instance, that a lot of our churches were built on the demolished sites of our ancient forefathers and foremothers, the ancestors who came before. Right. And we know, actually, let me look at this and let me explain this another way. One of the things that really tugs on my strings is when I find people who are being called to shamanism. And we do, don't we? It's not something, for me, that word was being dropped into my head before I even knew what it was. I was like, what does this word mean? I've got to go and research and find out. And a series of what I now don't believe were coincidences led me to my first teacher. But we see so many people who are being called to a shamanic path. And so, of course, they'll look for the most visible strands. So they feel they need to do shamanism, and then usually they think we need to go to the Americas, or they need to go off to the rainforest. They need to go and do Aya. And again, if you're called to it and that's your path, okay, but doesn't necessarily, that's not the be all and end all of shamanism. Or they think they need to go to Australia and look at the Dreamtime stuff over there, or they need to, you know, go to the Far East. They look for these exotic threads for shamanism. And I say, hold on, what about if you're being called to shamanism on the land on which you're standing? What about just digging a little bit deeper and exploring here? And, you know, and they'll be, but I want to meet a lion or a tiger or a bear. Yeah. Well, hold on, you're working with spirit. And yeah, our ancestors made a lot of our, you know, our power and spirit animal allies over here extinct. But if we're working with spirit, we're working with the land, they all still exist here. You work with the spirits of these Celtic lands. You've got your wolves, you've got your bears, you've got your eagles, and hey, sorry guys, but we have dragons. You know, all of that stuff. I just wish people would just stop and breathe and oh, shamanism, my card said I needed to explore shamanism. Right, I'll book a ticket to Peru straight away. Stop. What's on your doorstep? Find an ancient woodland, find a piece of unspoilt land, even get out into your back garden. Go and find someone who can teach you how to connect with spirit, and then first try connecting with spirit where you are. And of course, if you have some ancestral pull to go elsewhere, I'm not talking about a genuine, oh my God, I need to go and be with the hoodoos. I'm talking about, I need to explore shamanism, therefore I need to get on a plane. No, you don't. Right. No, you don't. So one of the ways that came through for me is I was at an event, I was at one of the UK shamanic gatherings many years ago, and there was a beautiful man there talking about using modern, using stories and reinventing stories to have a shamanic element. Because of course there's that theory that a lot of our old fairy tales across Europe is where we hid our old magics. And that was such a beautiful day, and people were reworking things like Rumpelstiltskin and using it to talk about the power of a medicine name, for instance. But one of my it got me thinking, and I was kind of calling out to my guides at the same time, saying, well, where are our stories? Because we would have had these, just as we know there were so many beautiful indigenous teaching stories, you know, that concept of being able to tell the tribe one story, and the different teachings would hit different people, shooting people with a story. Right. Where are ours? Because we would have had these in these British Isles as well. Where are they? And one of my guides very clearly said, we've got them, we're waiting. And so I started journeying and questing for these stories. And I was coming back from the journey with these full-fledged, just writing down these fully formed stories. Wow, great. Wow, yeah, it wasn't just a little bit of jigsaw bit and I'd have to fill in the rest and use my old journalistic skills. I was literally coming out with these teaching stories. And I thought, well, it can't just be me. So then I spoke to some of the people who'd been working in circle with me for a while and said, just try this. And they were like, oh, I've got this story. And that it was those stories that turned into my first book, that turned into Whispers from the Earth. But that wasn't the plan, I was recording all these stories, and I was sitting at my PC one day doing some really boring left brain work. I don't remember what it was. It was probably accounts or something. And as I was working, you know what it's like sometimes when spirit starts interrupting and you're trying to do something left brain and you're not in the journey, you're not in the work, but they're just starting. I was like, go away, go away. I'm trying to do this. I'll talk to you later, but I need to get my accounts done, that kind of. And they were so insistent. And she just kept saying, the stories you've been writing, you need to send them to a publisher. And then I went into that, you're making this up, Taz. So then I tried completely cutting off, and it kept coming back, and eventually I down tools went, right, if I'm not making this up, which publisher? And straight away, this voice said, Moonbooks. And don't be ridiculous, there's no such publisher as Moonbooks. I'm going to Google and prove it right now. Oh, there is. And I sent just a selection of the stories that had already been channeled, just pinged them an email through, and literally within about an hour, they'd come back and said, we're really interested, will you submit a full publishing proposal? So I did that, and within a couple of weeks, I got my first publishing deal.
Wow.
And that's how that book came about. And for me, if there's ever a sign that spirit will direct you and they will keep kicking, that was it, because I'd never heard of Moonbooks. I didn't even know they existed. They're part of a larger, they're a small part of a larger publishing group. Never heard of them.
Wow.
And yet, so yeah, there are all these beautiful ancient teachings and stories that they're not trapped in our lands. They've been being held safe by guardian spirits for many, many years. But for me, what I always say with that is, I don't really care if you believe that I'm channeling spirit, or if you just believe they're nice stories and you can learn something from them.
Yeah.
Get out there and do it, which again comes back to my whole attitude of giving people in this world what they need and displaying it in whichever way they need to see that in order to give them the medicine that they need to grow, that their soul is craving. And it doesn't matter for me whether they come to that through finding me as a coach, or hearing me as a speaker, or reading one of my books, or through somebody coming along to a spiritual empowerment program rather than signing up to a shamanic course. It doesn't matter. That program still has shamanism and the medicine wheel at its heart, but it has enabled me to build in other ways to describe and to teach and to share those teachings that make it more accessible to people who would otherwise have been left wanting.
Yeah, that's fantastic that you've got so many ways that you can approach it with people.
Yeah.
That they can work with you.
Yeah, it feels right for me. It feels right for my spirits. I know some people have seen me as a bit of a maverick, but that's because they don't sit and listen and understand where I'm coming from. It's not about trying to pull people into this path if they're not ready. It's about recognizing that our culture has spiritual emptiness. Our spirits have become eroded. We've learned to operate from the brain, disconnect the heart. We've become a world of heads dragging around bodies.
Right.
And I think that's why so many people are seeking and are looking for something else. And some people are absolutely cold and say they need shamanism, in which case they might find me, they might find someone else. But if they just know they need some kind of spiritual direction, but they have that left brain mentality that makes them afraid of getting to that point where they can't get out of bed in the morning without drawing an angel card, then my approach makes it very accessible and very grounded. And once they're into that program, it's not frivolous, it's not left brain. I think when we talk about shamans as being walkers between the worlds, we need to look at that in a different way. So my approach bridges the old ways and modern culture. It doesn't erode the teachings, it doesn't dilute the teachings, but it allows people to access them who wouldn't ordinarily have the courage to do so. And I think that sometimes I think, well, that could be the modern day equivalent of being a walker between the worlds. I've got one foot in the land of spirit and very clearly one foot in the land of now, and that allows me to bridge that gap. And I think sometimes we identify as being either extreme left brain, and I'm not going to believe anything unless I see it, or extreme right, not in terms of politics, but in terms of left brain circumference.
Yeah.
So we're either really over there, and unless we can see it and it cuts us, we don't believe it, or we're all the way over there and we can't get out of bed without drawing an angel card. And somewhere in the middle is a gulf, and that gulf is where all the good stuff is falling down, and we're missing it because we are either, I'm not teaching people like that unless they've been specifically called to shamanism, because that's my path and that's okay, or I can't touch that stuff because it's too woo-woo and people will laugh at me. And they're just on either side of that divide. I've got a foot either side, and I think there are teachings and magic and medicine and really important, powerful stuff that are being lost down that divide because we are identifying too strongly as being one way or the other. But that again does not mean that we should erode what shamanism is. It doesn't mean that we can suddenly start calling something shamanic. It doesn't mean we can follow that downward trend that for me started with Reiki drumming. And that's not to knock Reiki drumming. That's brought lots of people to my circle who've started with Reiki drumming. But again, it's not Reiki drumming. You're doing Reiki and you're drumming. And I think that started that trend of let's just tag shamanism onto the end of something and blend things. We're not blending things. We are providing a toolkit of options that includes that, and that. But it doesn't mean that they're turning into a smoothie. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I love your analogy with this huge cavernous, what do you call it?
It's a gulf, isn't it? It's a crater, it's a gulf, it's a chasm.
And yes, the chasm, and they're, being stuck on one side or the other, and what's being lost in that depth.
Just bridge the gap. So long as you know who you are enough and you have a strong enough identity with your spiritual heritage, your spiritual lineage, you have a clear enough understanding of the boundaries between different practices, you should be able to bridge that gap and provide an entry point for people to learn and grow without bastardizing shamanism.
Excellent. Well said. Thank you for that advice.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
We're getting close to the ending time, but I wanted to be sure to learn a little bit more about how you came into this. So you mentioned the drumming and the Reiki, and that, that was an entry point for people to start working with you.
Mm-hmm.
How did your shamanic path take form? What were your formative teachers and trainings?
Okay, so I said I'd always been aware of spirit from a young age, and people had tried to steer me into different pathways. If I went for a reading, they'd say, you have the gift and we need to train you. I don't believe that there's a gift. I think we've all got something. It's just that we are trained to switch it off. I don't think there's any special gift. I thought, should I try spiritualist church? I did a bit of mediumistic training, and nothing quite felt right. And as I said, the word shamanism started being dropped into my head by a voice that I now recognize as one of my guides. Actually, the same one that was send that to a publisher. She's very insistent. And I went away and researched it, and I found, it was when I was still working as an editor in Kent, and I found someone who was doing some shamanic teachings nearby. And back then I was in the same place that I know so many others are, which I think is why I'm so passionate about saying, come on, we've got to make it easier for people to access this, because I didn't know then. When I was first starting to explore this, I was in that same kind of level of ignorance where everybody thinks, oh, it's that North American Indian stuff. No, it isn't. But we all think that because of Hollywood and the movies. And I need to go and start buying lots of pictures with wolves and feathers and eagles and things. No, you don't. But I remember being caught in that, which is why I guess I understand why people come into it that way. Anyway, I found this teacher, and I did the classic, I'm going to be left brain here and I'm going to see what I can get. I'm an editor, and I edit a series of healthcare publications. So would you give me a free place on your course and I'll do a report on it? And she said, yes, I'll do that. Yeah. And I was in this kind of, I've got this free thing. It's like a different person when I think about it now. I cringe. But then spirit, the universe had other ideas. I was at a pride event in London, and the driver had a meltdown and crashed the bus and drove into a metal barrier. He caved the bus in just below my seat, drove through an Armco barrier, and I ended up with whiplash. And I
Oh
couldn't
my
go.
God.
And
Is
I
that
couldn't
how
go.
your back got broken?
No, the back broken was that just reinforced the back break. The back break was a car accident when I was overtaking on a Brava hill, and then recognized that I was about to crash into somebody head on, had a moment of bliss on getting out, and then realized I couldn't take somebody else out on my own death wish. So I slammed the brakes on, lost control of the car, and ended up down 8-9 foot ditch and hit into a tree. And there's a long story behind that. I went back to work and I was walking around on it all day until I got to that point of about in the afternoon of going, oh, that's a bit sore. And then I ended up in A&E on a flatbed for 9 hours with my head packed in sandbags with nobody telling me what was going on. And then they said, you've crushed 3 of your vertebrae. So yeah, so that different incident. That's another story for another day, or we could talk about that for hours. But so that first, I found somebody to teach me shamanism, didn't work out. And I now know that would have just been the wrong teacher. And then I got headhunted for a new job, which is what brought me from Kent over to Lincolnshire. And I bought one of a series of books that were all about Boudica, you know, our Iceni warrior queen. And I just bought the book and stuck it in a bag and thought no more of it. And I decided that I was going to take this book when we went house hunting over in this area, because 130 odd miles between the two places, so I had to relocate and stuff. And I started reading this book, and then I went to an arts festival in another part of the country between leaving that job and taking the new one. I was in my notice period. And I noticed that one of the authors at that event was the author. That's the woman that wrote that Boudica book, I'm sure it is. So we went to her talk, and she started talking about shamanism. Oh, okay. Now, the job I was going to was to edit a series of titles for the veterinary profession. And then this same lady started talking about the fact that she used to be a veterinary anaesthetist. And I thought, ooh, if I got an interview with this lady, that would really score some brownie points when I take this job. So I did that, and I started interviewing her, and she started writing a column for us after I went to that newspaper, that magazine. And then she started talking more about the shamanic teachings, because that series of Boudica books are all a work of dreaming. That was all. She went into the journey, she brought back the story, and she wrote them. She's how they feel so real, I guess. And then she decided she would start teaching shamanism, and said, would you like to be one of my guinea pigs? So that's how it happened. Yeah, I mean, that's such a bizarre coincidence. And I worked with her for a couple of years, and then that didn't quite work out. She decided to stop teaching for a while and then started teaching a different group. And I ended up working with her teacher. I learned predominantly with a guy called Chris Lutterchow, who runs the Northern Drums Shamanic School over here. And he is one of the few white people I would happily call a shaman. His story is amazing. You should interview him at some point if you get the opportunity. He's amazing. I worked with him for a while, for several years. And then he wanted somebody to assist him, and everybody was saying, I want it, I want it. And I was the one saying, I don't want it, I'm not doing it, I don't have time. And he kept saying, Taz, Spirit says it needs to be you. So I did that for a while. And then Spirit started kicking me to get out on my own. And I said, no, I haven't learned enough. And then it got really embarrassing, because every time I turned up to sit in circle with Chris, I'd be wide awake, I'd get into circle. And the second it opened, I'd go,
Really?
Yeah. It was getting really embarrassing. I would literally, the second circle opened, I'd go to sleep. And my spirits were kicking me and saying, you need to go out on your own. You need to get out on your own. And that's what happened. They just kept turning me off every time I tried to work with somebody else.
Yeah, interesting.
Until I got out there. And then what really did it was a lady called Elsa Malpas, we lost last year, was also involved in the UK Shamanic gathering. I'd been there assisting Chris on one of his workshops. And at the end of it, she said, when are you going to have learned enough to teach on your own, Taz? Okay. So between all of that and spirit kicks and divination work, it happened. And I've never looked back. I still love learning from other people. I mean, when I used to go to that big shamanic gathering, it meant that I got to work with some of the most amazing shamanic and medicine people from all over the world. And I'm big on holding on to that attitude of the hungry learner, which is why I say, I've been practicing for 20 odd years and I'm just beginning. So the second we switch that off, the second we switch off our ability to learn or think we know it all, something dies, and I want to keep learning. Not for the sake of learning, but to enrich my own soul and to be able to pass that on and help others with it. We've never learned everything. Never.
Right. Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you, Taz. I love this conversation with you. It's full of juicy pieces to hold on to.
Thank you. Thank you.
In closing, is there anything else that we didn't cover that you'd just like to add?
Oh, is there anything else? Do you know, I don't think so. The one message I always give out, and it's a bit of a cliche, but it's so true. This whole idea of living, two things. This whole idea of living your truth. I know there's a lot of backlash over here from people who are starting to poo-poo the concept of authenticity. And we shouldn't ever poo-poo authenticity. We need authenticity. I think there's a difference. Nobody should ever have to tell you they are authentic, but we all need to bring through more authenticity. If somebody ever starts having a dig about that word, then take a step back, look at them and ask yourself why they might have an issue with something being authentic. But do it without going into judgment. Just observe, just watch, don't listen to what people say, watch what they do. And the other point, and this is where it's a bit of a cliche, but I think it's so, so true. Please make sure that whatever dreams you're following, whatever path you're following, make sure that they're your dreams and not somebody else's. Because that's so easy. One of the things I always start circle with when I introduce myself and start talking about the teachings is to say to people that nobody should ever feel obligated to do anything I teach. If something doesn't feel right, and it doesn't feel right with their guides, they shouldn't do it. And there's a difference between I'm a bit scared of and that doesn't feel right. If you're a bit scared, I'm going to push you to do it. If it doesn't feel right, don't do it, because my truth might not be your truth. And that's absolutely the same in life. So just take a step back. I know that when I was chasing materialism and the next promotion and getting all these crazy promotions at a young age, I was chasing somebody else's dream. I was trying to prove something to myself and to others, and it was ticking the ego box, but it was shriveling my soul. So just that, make sure you're following your own dream and not somebody else's.
Wow, right. Thank you so much for your time, Taz. It's great meeting you on here.
You too. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been my pleasure.